you like living? Do you like to be alive? Would you rather be dead? I'm guessing probably not. The fact that you're here suggests that you actually prefer being alive to being dead. You did get out of bed this morning. You didn't kill yourself. So that's a sign that you do like to live. In fact, every day we make that decision. We decide life is good. Now, life isn't always good. There are some very painful parts of life. But overall, we think it's pretty good. One of the most painful parts of my life ever was from back when I was 11 years old. And my father died. And that was probably the most painful, awful thing in my life ever. It took me a long time to get over it. My mother tells me I wouldn't even mention it for many months, because I was in complete denial. Couldn't even deal with the emotional pain of it at that age. So that was pretty miserable. And unfortunately, my father didn't have a chance at living again. That's what I'm talking about, is living again. He didn't have that chance. He didn't have a chance to reach longevity escape velocity. He didn't have a chance to be cryopreserved. I've been a little more lucky. I've had a few brushes with death, where I can think of it as being another chance that I'm getting, that I'm living again. The first time was when I was only 2 years old and had some kind of obscure blood disease in the form of purpura, which apparently was incurable. They had no idea what to do with it, so they just let me lie there and see if I would make it or not. Unfortunately, I did. Another one was about 20 years ago in Mexico. If you ever go to Mexico, for goodness sake, get autoclave medical insurance so they can get you an air ambulance out of there, because if we hadn't had that, we'd have been in serious trouble. But we were down there looking at the total eclipse of the sun, and I was asleep in the back of a vehicle when it went off the road, flipped over twice. I was thrown out to the back of it. The truck was completely wrecked, and we could see bits of it all the way down the road, and I landed on my feet. So, good. That works out well. That happened again earlier this year. This time I was driving. Back in Phoenix, coming up from the airport, and got into a bit of a situation, tried to avoid a collision, lost control, ended up going straight into the concrete wall, and totaled my vehicle. My airbags did their job, thank you modern technology. I came out almost completely unscratched. I'm rather happy about this situation because it gave me a chance to get rid of my 10-year-old car and buy a new one, which I much prefer. So I felt like I've had a few second chances, but not everybody does. In fact, the problem is that we age and we die. And you might think, well, that's the point at which we don't have any more chances to live again. Wrong. If you make the right arrangements, if you plan ahead, you can actually live again. And there are some good reasons to do so. Now, the main method of doing so, which I'm going to talk about, which my organization, the Alcor Foundation, does, is cryonic suspension or cryopreservation. This is a way of living again. So I can explain a little bit about how that works, or how it may work, and then why you should do it. Why, if you like living, this is something sensible to do. And now if you don't want to do it, you're being very silly. Okay, so cryopreservation. The basic idea is, you can think of it in a way as a kind of medical time travel. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, suppose that right now, during my talk, you get so excited about what I'm saying that you have a heart attack and you drop dead. Happens quite often, actually. Really. Well, the problem is we don't have the technology here to help you, unless there happen to be some doctors in the room with defibrillation equipment and various drugs and other equipment. They're probably going to be taken from here across space, through space to another location where they have more advanced medical technology and more advanced skills where they can help you. Okay, well, if you are dying today or sometime in the future of old age, cancer, of heart disease, of something that we cannot cure, does that mean that we give up on you? Well, in my view, no, because if you go back a few decades, people used to die of things that today we can bring them back from. They can live again. When someone stopped breathing in the past, the typical reaction was, rather like on the old Star Trek show, where you kind of look over the person, not actually do anything and say, "He's dead, Jim." And that was it. There was no further action. Now we don't do that. We do CPR, we start injecting them with various drugs, defibrillate, all kinds of things we can do, and many times those people come back to life. There have even been actually some children especially who have drowned in cold water and been apparently clinically dead for many hours and been restored and been perfectly okay. So what we do is, it depends on the particular situation, the circumstances, but in a good situation we get some advance warning. We know that you're on the decline, we're keeping a watch on you. We come out to the hospital or hospice, wherever you are, and within seconds of legal death being declared, we will go into action. Now I say legal death, and I emphasize that legal death or clinical death are not the same as biological death. At the point at which a doctor says, you're dead, legally, clinically, what they're really saying is, we can't do anything more for you given today's level of technology. In fact, they're not really even saying that. What they may be saying is, well, look, we could bring you back if we work really hard on you, but you'd be really miserable, and then you just stop functioning again in another few minutes or a few hours. So there isn't really this bright line where you're suddenly dead and that's it. Almost everything is still alive. Certain critical parts of your system have given up on you. So it seems rather a waste, especially in these days of being environmentally conscious, that you don't recycle that person and give them another chance. You just throw them away in the trash. Now, so in cryonics, basically what we do is, at that point, the point of legal death, we're allowed to go into action. And generally, in most jurisdictions, we can't go into action before that. We will immediately start external cooling, because it's very important to start lowering body temperatures as rapidly as possible, because the quicker you slow metabolism, the more you reduce the damage that follows when the body stops functioning. We will then access the vascular system and wash out the blood and replace it with what we call a transport solution. That's the solution we use to minimize biological damage while we move you out of that location to the cryonics organization. That's where the second stage takes place, where we replace the transport solution with a cryoprotectant. You can think of a cryoprotectant as a kind of medical grade antifreeze. We don't want lots of water sitting around in your body. Yes, your body may be a pond, but we don't want that pond freezing over. So we're going to suck that pond dry and replace it with this cryoprotectant. It's much nicer for the cells. Essentially what we do is introduce a pretty high concentration, and then as we lower the temperature, which eventually will be minus 196 degrees C, minus 320 Fahrenheit, pretty chilly. At that temperature, as we go down to that temperature, if you don't remove the water, you get a lot of ice crystal formation, and that's very bad news for the cells. So we avoid that as much as possible, which is almost completely, and vitrify the patient instead. By vitrifying, essentially you're making the stuff get thicker and thicker and thicker until it forms a big solid block of glass and holds everything in the body in place, all the cells in place, without doing any additional damage. So simplify the process. So that's the basic idea. And once you're in liquid nitrogen, you can wait until technology catches up, until we have the technological capability to repair whatever killed you. Heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, the aging process itself. And then we can hopefully bring you back. And you have another chance at life, a second chance to live again. Now, why don't more people do this? To me, this seems like an eminently reasonable, sensible idea. I mean, okay, if I look like that, I might have a second thought. But if you're enjoying life, why don't you want more of it? I mean, you're making this choice now. Why will it be different in the future? Why won't you suddenly decide, oh, 40 years, 60 years, 80 years, that's enough? Remember, we're not talking about bringing you back as someone old, someone who's dysfunctional, someone who's losing their capabilities. We're talking about bringing you back rejuvenated, in a fresh, young body. Actually, probably younger and fresher than even most of those here. There's quite a few young, fresh bodies around. But we're talking about removing all your diseases, all your problems, all your genetic defects that you may have dealt with, like my short-sightedness, for instance. Get rid of these contact lenses, that would be nice. Maybe even better than you ever were. So saying, I don't want to come back as an old crippled person, try and live like that, that's just the objection. Now, there may be objections that it's not going to work. Okay, fine, we can address those. I think actually, if we get you under good conditions, it's very likely to work, because we can show you electron microscope studies of vitrified neural tissue, and they look really good. Compare those to basically frozen tissue, it looks vastly better. And we do know something about memory, how it's encoded in the brain, how personality is installed. We know a little bit about that now. And those structures, those synaptic connections, for instance, are very well preserved by the current procedures we use. So if you are in your brain, if you're stored in your brain, your personality, your memories, who you are is in there, then we've got a pretty good idea that we are preserving that really well. And if you accept the very reasonable premise that technology keeps advancing over time, it's not really too controversial, and you don't see any obvious limits to those capabilities, at some point in the future we should be able to remove the vitrification process, reverse the aging process, and bring you back. So technically it seems pretty feasible. So what are the real objections? Why aren't there far more people with arrangements for cryopreservation? Why are there only 2,000 or fewer people who've made these arrangements? After all, you can take any crazy idea out of there. out in the world, people who believe in aliens from another dimension, and you can find they have many, many adherents with no evidence whatsoever. We've got some pretty good evidence. So why aren't they doing it? Well, to me, it's really an emotional thing. There are some quite reasonable worries. You might worry that you will come back alone and not know anybody. You might be worried that you will be obsolete, that the world will be too alien. I think a lot of it's kind of an emotional reaction. When I was doing my graduate work, I had one of my philosophers was a very smart woman, very technically minded, trained at MIT, a materialist, didn't believe in any kind of spiritual stuff. But she thought the idea of cryonics was very strange. She didn't like it at all. And when I asked her why that was, I was expecting some kind of deep philosophical argument. She said, well, it's just ghastly. That's a very peculiar reaction. That's very much like Leon Kass and his wisdom of repugnance. She's basically saying that the idea was ghastly, even though, what are the alternatives? Well, you could lie on the ground and be eaten by worms and bacteria. That sounds much better. Or we can throw you in a gigantic oven and incinerate you until your head explodes. Oh, much better, much less ghastly. So these are kind of strange objections, and yet these are the main objections that come up. Now, I do think there are some reasonable concerns about coming back into an alien future, something very different. But, you know, I find that hard to take seriously because I moved from England in the 1980s to Southern California. That was very much like moving to an alien world. Water wasn't falling out of the sky all the time. It was a whole different environment. Everything was bright. People looked different and better. So I coped okay. It wasn't so bad. And you may know people. I mean, if you get to know other people who have these arrangements, you will know people. If you persuade your friends and relatives to join you, rather than just resisting the idea, because what will my friends think of me, what if instead you're pioneering? You go talk to your friends, you explain why this is a good, sensible idea, and how you love them, and you want them to keep living, rather they didn't let themselves die unnecessarily. If you explain that to them, more people might actually be around who you do know. Now, I also think that we have some reason to think that if you do come back, because we don't know for sure this will work, we can't guarantee it, but again, the general technological trend suggests that it probably will happen. I think that if you do come back, if we can revive you in the future, that means that the world will be a pretty decent place. My view is that the world has got generally better over time. Okay, we have these little ups and downs, we have little things like Stalin, little setbacks like that, but overall things do get better. We get wealthier and healthier, we live longer, we have better societies, we have less violence. Over the long run, things do get better. If the world really goes to hell, then they're not going to bother bringing you back. It won't be that kind of society where anybody will be bothered. So any kind of world that does bring you back, I suspect, will be one which is at least as good as what we have today. Quite possibly better. Probably quite likely better. So that shouldn't be a reason to fear it. Not knowing anybody shouldn't be a huge reason to fear it. Again, when I made that big 6,000-mile move, I didn't know anybody. That's kind of refreshing, actually. One thing that's good about living again is that you get to come back with all the knowledge you've acquired over, who knows how long it is at that point, several decades, 8 or 9 decades maybe. But you come back in a vigorous, young, healthy body where you can apply that wisdom and start again. You can change direction. You have the energy to change the direction. You get both the knowledge and the energy at the same time. You may become what I like to call an ultra-mature person. Not a stodgy old person, but ultra-mature. You gain that maturity and wisdom, but you have the energy of youth. So, to me, the main objections are, some of them are reasonable. The idea of a world that's not known, a world full of people you don't know. But those are all objections that should not let you think that death is better. Death is not better. If life is good, then make the arrangements. Just as you try to eat healthily and exercise and do other things, and as you will probably take these life extension therapies to stay alive and healthy, make arrangements for cryopreservation in case you get hit by a bus tomorrow, in case you catch some disease. It doesn't matter if you're young, something can happen. And it's best to make these arrangements in advance. If you're afraid of being alone, persuade your friends and family to join up. Once you have joined up, you can even set up something we call a life pact, which essentially is an agreement across generations to help each other out. So if you're cryopreserved, and if you come out before me, you make an agreement that you'll help me reintegrate. You'll give me a helping hand. And then when you do that, in turn, you'll help the next person along. So that's a way of kind of having a chain of support, personal support over time, that will ensure that you don't come out alone. even if this doesn't become a very popular process, you'll still know people who care about you and who want to bring you back healthily. And good mental health too. So, cryonics, cryopreservation may seem like a peculiar thing, but really it's the most conservative thing in the world. It's conservative medicine. We are literally conserving you. Throwing them in the ground is not conservative medicine. It may seem like a strange thing to do. It may seem unconventional and peculiar. But that's only because people are stupid. In the future, everybody will do this. It will seem like the normal, sensible thing to do. Just as like now, we don't think having slaves is cool, whereas in the past, well, of course you have slaves. It's the normal thing to do. So if you don't make cryopreservation arrangements, you're going to look stupid in the future. People will look back and say, why on earth were these people throwing themselves in the ground or in these big ovens when they could have been nicely cryopreserved? So if you love life, choose the right thing, choose to be cryopreserved. Thank you.